Hey everybody, it's Mike Cadieux for another live session this afternoon. Really excited to have Rapid Ratings and Eric from Rapid Ratings, Matthew Roth from the USAA, as well as Jennifer Baez from the Walgreens Boots Alliance here with us. I'm just getting set up, so if you give me a couple of seconds, we got people flowing into the live studio audience inside of Zoom, but we're also in the process of streaming out to LinkedIn Live.
Yeah, we are live.
And Tina's in the back control room, just told us that we're live, so that's great news. I love it when everything actually works the way it's supposed to. Okay, so that said, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. Then we'll jump in and we'll start with today. So just like with all of our Procurement Foundry events, those of you who are in the audience right now and in the actual Zoom room, please feel free to use the Q&A functionality that is at the bottom of your screen if you want to interact, if you want to talk about risk, if you have questions for Matt and Jennifer and Eric, please feel free to use that. Please use the chat. Tell us where you're at, where you're from. I've got a couple of polling questions as well. I'll ask you a couple of polling questions, and I'm asking if you could just put them in the chat so that I can see the numbers. It's my typical, Mike Cadieux 1 through 5 question. If you've been in one of our rooms before, you'll know what that is. And also, thank you and hello to all the folks that are on LinkedIn Live. Wow, we get a bunch of people on LinkedIn Live already. So that said, why don't we get started with today's panel? I am going to just do a quick screen share. The topic for today is all around who owns risk anymore. So we're going to talk a little bit about what risk is and where risk is inside of your organization, who owns risk, what different types of risk we have, things like that. And just so you know who is with us again, yours truly. I don't know why I have. Thank you for putting my picture up there, Eric. Really appreciate it. Matt Roth from the USAA, as I mentioned, Eric Evans from Rapid Ratings, and Jennifer Baez from Walgreens Boots Alliance. So that said, why don't we do this? Because I don't like to give introductions. Why don't we go around the horn really quickly and just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you currently do in your role, and what your background is, and what what you want to tell us about your position with risk. We'll start with Jennifer. How's that, ladies first?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jennifer Baez, and
Hi,
like
Jennifer.
you mentioned, I work at Walgreens Boots Alliance right now as a group category manager. So I'm leading, a smaller team in the HR and benefits space, which is our largest category, as well as pharmacy services, so servicing all of our 9,100 pharmacies. My background is in procurement and strategic sourcing. I've been doing it for just over 12 years. A couple of companies I've worked for is Johnson Controls, L Brands, who owns Bath & Body Works, Victoria's Secret, Scott's Miracle Grow, et cetera. So just been really great to be part of some wonderful strategic sourcing organizations.
Wow, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here today. Matt, want to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do?
Sure. Hi, I'm Matt Roth. I am with USAA for about the last 8 years. Just this year, took over enterprise due diligence as a shared service with third-party risk management and procurement. My background before that, I was a financial analyst and a trader in the securities industry for about 15 years.
Wow. I was just watching CNBC yesterday, and it's like a riptide right now. That's congratulations on that. That's amazing. I don't meet very many people who have survived being traders before, so that's cool. Eric, how about a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what you do for Rapid Ratings? That would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. Happy to join today. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining. So I manage our partnerships and alliances at Rapid Ratings and help a lot of our clients and prospects in terms of integrating our data and our scores into procurement GRC platforms. So get to learn a lot, hear the needs, the use cases, and then I also co-chair the continuous working monitoring group at Shared Assessment. So I love talking about risk and everything that's going on. Thank you.
Yeah, you've got a really interesting model over at Rapid Ratings. I've noticed not only do people acquire Rapid Ratings as a standalone product, but you also integrate into some other aggregation tools as well, right? So you provide your data both individually on your own platform, but you also aggregate it as well.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So we know that a lot of clients, it's important to them to operationalize, financial health and get it into, their workflows and processes. So that's typically in procurement, GRC platforms, third-party risk modules. And so what we're doing is the financial health on public and private companies, and we go get that data direct from the suppliers if they're private. So that's what's unique about us. And kind of like running an MRI or a CAT scan on the financials. And so you get that kind of early warning signal.
Yeah, I like that. We're going to come back to that because I
Sure.
love that analogy of CAT scan versus the MRI. As usual, I'm just going to kind of set the tone in the room right now. So I've got an audience poll for you. I'm really interested in if you could put this into the chat window inside of the room, or if you can put this up on LinkedIn. I'll monitor some numbers and we'll kind of get to a Mike Cadieux abbreviated mathematical equation of where everybody is on average. So how would you rank the maturity of your risk management program? And this is for the audience as a whole. On a scale of 1 to 5, I kind of base everything on 1 to 5. 1 meaning you have no idea what risk management actually means, and you don't know how you got in this room today, and you just figured you're going to eat lunch and listen to us. And number 5 being, hey, we know all of our risk. We proactively manage everything. We're basically Yoda we are Yoda, and we know everything there is to know about our risk, about our suppliers, about our tier 2s, our tier 3s. So that would be a 5. Anybody who puts 5 in the listings, I'm gonna call out. But that said, if you could fill that information out for us, that would be great. Let's jump in and talk a little bit about defining risk today. So what are the key challenges that your teams are facing? What are the risks that businesses need to look out for? Things like that. Let's start with Matt and Jennifer. What are the key challenges that your teams are facing today associated with risk? Matt, you want to jump in on this?
Sure. The biggest challenge that we're seeing is the consolidation of risk into the first line of defense at our company. We had about half of our risk dimensions carried to the second line, and we've moved everything into the first line for just for streamlining reasons. And that's all been combined on, not all of it, but 10 of the dimensions have been combined onto my team. So we own everything from operational and people, compliance, financial viability. The only things that we don't own at this point are InfoSec, privacy, diversity, and technology. So those require special skill sets, and we've got a sort of a combined team going in. So it's really logistics and process that we're working on right now in our risk.
Great. How about you, Jennifer? Any challenges that your teams are facing right now that you're aware of?
Yeah, I think, it's kind of similarly, I feel like it is fairly decentralized. We have started, a pretty robust strategy process where we're getting into identifying risks. We do have, a program, a risk management system that we're using today that, it has some ongoing monitoring. It has some, proactive things that we're doing as well. But I think, it definitely could be more centralized, a little bit more formalized. And I think we're just challenged because the category management team, of course, we're stretched so thin, and we have, so many targets from a financial standpoint that it doesn't always make it to the top of our list, unfortunately.
Yeah, I understand that. Eric, you're in an interesting position. You're a provider of risk-related tools and support services. Tell us a little bit about the market right now. I mean, obviously with COVID and everybody's using the word risk now, right? Versus before, and a lot of it has to do with supply chain risk now. And if I don't get toilet paper, it's going to be the apocalypse and things like that. So tell me a little bit about from a provider perspective.
Sure.
What's going on with risk in your world? What are you seeing? What are the key challenges that teams that are coming to you are facing?
Yeah, really, really good question. So, through the pandemic, it was really getting accurate data, but also data fast and also on private companies, which tends to, lack from our perspective. They're very shy about sharing that. And so, we're good at getting it. It's so I think, in the pandemic, we had, either prospects or newer clients, wanting it faster, or existing clients. And so what we did as well, we did some stress testing to really reduce revenues, with pro formas to kind of give them insights faster on, how bad it is or the deterioration in their supply chain from a financial health perspective. And then also tiering of vendors, and also I think from what we've seen, companies have been increasing their coverage because they want to cast a wider net. And then that also dovetails into how frequent do you want to look at a company. It's no longer, every other year or every year. It's, do you want it quarterly or semi-annually or annually, depending on, the criticality. So I think,
Right.
all that comes into play on how do you categorize that particular vendor or supplier and then their suppliers.
Yeah, I mean, we'll jump into tier 2 and tier 3 in a minute.
Yeah, of course.
I'm interested from Matt's perspective at the USAA, right, Matt? I mean, you're dealing with both public and private sector entities, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
And you're, I mean, data must be really hard to come by in some situations to calculate risk or to build a risk model in some cases.
So what we've done is we take a pretty hard line in our contracting to include the requirement to provide financials and other due diligence related data in there. And when companies push back, we just tell them, you want to do business with us or not. But there's always going to be those companies that just won't do it. There are some very large companies that we deal with that do not provide the kind of data that we want. And so we've done some workarounds. We've done some negotiation on it, but in general, we get financials from everybody that probably 90%, 95% of our suppliers. And we're about in our critical and high risk population of suppliers, we're probably 70-30 private to public. So just in general, so if I've got about 150 critical suppliers, I'm getting financials from probably 115 to 120 of them.
Wow, that's great. That's great. I want to talk. We'll get into a little bit more around KPIs and things like that. I'm really interested in how you evaluate your company's risk exposure, and how do you spot some early warning signs associated with that. So Jennifer, you have any thoughts on that, or is there any way that how do you evaluate your risk exposure, and then what early signs? And Eric, I'll come back to you, and then Matt. Okay.
Yeah. So at Walgreens, we have a finance procurement team that supports us in kind of digging through the financials, looking through, whether it's credit score or some other indicators. They'll support us there. So it is more of a spot check, which is, really great to have before we even get into the contract or have it approved. So that's a really great way to just check if there's something green, yellow, red kind of situation there. If there is a supplier that falls into that yellow category that we're a little bit, unsure about, that's one that we would probably keep on a plan to monitor on an ongoing basis. So that's kind of the initial check, I would say, before we even get into anything beyond the financial risk.
All right, Eric, yourself, what do you see your clients coming to the table with? How are they evaluating risk exposure? Sure. And what are some of the early warning signs? And I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Risk is no longer just financial risk, right? I mean, we used to have when I was in this role 3 years ago now, I can't believe it's been 3 years, but 3 years ago when I was actually in an operating procurement department, we basically had one question, which was, okay, are we more than 10% of the revenue of the vendor? If we are, then somebody would throw up a flare and we'd have to go investigate it more. And oh, by the way, are they begging us for payables and things like that? Those would be telltale signs. But it's not just financial risk anymore, right? So tell us a little bit about what the early warning signs are that you see and that you advise your clients on. and
Yeah,
how
so-
much more it is than just finance.
Sure. Well, so obviously there's other risk domains out there like cyber and ESG and sustainability, and they kind of all intersect. And so, I mean, the way our perspective is that financial is foundational. So it really does start with financials, because everything that a company is going through is reflected in their financials. And so if they're kind of shaky foundation, they may not be able to invest in and fund other programs or invest in their infrastructure, to help thwart, cyber attacks and things like that. So, I mean, from our perspective, we're looking at indicators around leverage, liquidity, earnings performance. The FHR, the financial health rating, is a short-term indicator of default risk. And then we do intersect it with a core health score that looks at more operational efficiency 2 to 3 years out. And that gets into like capital structure and cost structure. So,
Yep.
What we have done is taken our data and done other correlations around quality and performance. And so what was interesting was that companies that were weak financially were more than 2 times likely to ship a defective product or ship late. So that's why we really do look at financial as being foundational, even though there are other risks that intersect with it. So you need to look at holistically, but look at some leading indicators for that early warning signal before that trend down.
What about yourself, Matt? What about how do you what type of early warning signs do you try and track? Oh, you're on mute, buddy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So it really depends on which dimension of risk, because I think I said we're tracking 16 dimensions now of risk, and within financials, we use a model that we derived from working with Moody's and S&P several years back, and we've modified it to our own means, getting away from just a credit risk model and making it more of a financial viability model. So give a little more weight to short-term liquidity and cash flow, because we're trying to match the duration of our average contract. So, profitability, yeah, that's important in a bond rating model, but when I'm only looking at 3 to 5 years, which is our average life of contract, it's not as important as cash flow and liquidity. When we look at other dimensions, like reputation, we're looking for increased buzz about a company from a negative side. So we will see, we've used a few different services through third parties and some, complex Google searches that we built ourselves years ago, where we're just looking to say, are there negative things buzzing around about this company? And when it reaches when it goes from that low buzz to, something you're starting to notice,
Yeah,
that's probably telling you that there's something happening
yeah.
out there that's people are going to take notice. That's not an exact science by any means. It's really a gut feel. And the other dimensions, a lot of it is driven by regulatory concerns. We're a bank and an insurance company, so we have insurance regulators, and we also have CFPB and SEC and OCC looking at what we're doing. So we have to stay within the confines of those regulatory rules, as well as trying to do some predictive analysis in those other risk dimensions. But there's a question in the chat from Jeff Fowler about saying his vendor risk function is cumbersome and inefficient. We're going through that too. We're building through it. And I think this kind of applies to the question that he was asking, what approach are we using for vetting supplier where customer information is involved? it's really about information security. So we do have a very robust InfoSec team who will go in and look at what supplier systems look like for the safety of our members, and then also looking at reputation and all their compliance and the laws and rules that apply to the service that they're providing for us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thanks for that, man. Great insight. I love the fact that you said you're tracking 16 different dimensions there. I've heard of one organization that's tracking 22 dimensions now, which is unbelievable to me, to think that, I come from a place where it used to be one question. Obviously there's, the Office of the Chief Information Security Officer now. You've got corporate social responsibility, issues now. And not only are you worried about tier 1, but now you're worried in a lot of cases about tier 2 and tier 3. Is all risk the same, or in building out your models, Jennifer and Matt, are they weighted differently? I mean, is corporate social responsibility risk and financial risk weighted differently? And Eric, maybe you can tell me a little bit about that as well. I'll ask Jennifer first. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say in my current role, I don't see that there's any weight that's carried more so than the other. I have, however, in the past seen where the team, worked together to decide what was more important or more critical to the supply chain than other types of risk, and what was more likely to happen. So those are the ones that we prioritized over others. So I think it just really depends on the company, the group, and really what you're working on. In supply chain as well, it's going to be a little bit different, where I'm in an indirect role, so we're more service-based. So those markers are very different, of course, than for direct materials.
What about you, Eric? What are you seeing in that space? Are there different weights to different models? How much of this is the DNA of the company that's actually building the model on your tool or someone else's tool? Mm-hmm. Everybody's got a different DNA set. Everybody else has got a different risk platform or profile, right?
Right. And we really do let the client kind of, set their threshold. Of course, we have alerts that, if it falls below a certain level for us, a score of 40 and below is high risk and very high risk. So, as that trends down and seeing the intersection of short-term and long-term, but with, building out a scorecard, it really is dependent on, like Jennifer said, where they're really at, and how do they really approach it, and how many domains they have. So it could be 25% for 4 domains, a third and a third. If they have a lot of PII, they might have a lot of cyber type related, a little higher.
Exactly.
They may have if they've been burned by bankruptcies and a lot of defaults, financial might be higher. Through the pandemic, if they've got depending on where the suppliers are, maybe they're doing different scorecarding, based on country. So it could be that, there was a lot of private Chinese companies that, went bankrupt last year, as the pandemic was spreading from, China to Europe to US. But so that could be happening as well.
On a global basis, is supplier risk? I'm curious your exposure to this, all three of you actually, based on the size of your organizations, and Eric, who's playing on a global field and selling solutions. Is risk management the same in all geographies, or is it different? I mean, with some minor exceptions. I mean, you get GDPR over in Europe, which hasn't necessarily made its way to the United States yet, although California and some others are rapidly adopting. Is there different types of risk? I mean, earlier today, I was on a conversation around supplier diversity and inclusion, right? Supplier diversity and inclusion in the United States is completely different than it is in Europe or Asia Pac. Is that the same in risk, or does risk tend to transfer across international lines better? How about Matt? We'll start with Matt. I apologize.
Yeah, we have very limited international exposure. We have members around the world, but a lot of them still get service from the US. So
right.
We don't do that much overseas business that become a factor. But I would say just in general, that that we will adopt the strictest standard for risk management from anywhere that we have exposure. So if I have exposure in the U.S. and in Europe, I'm probably following GDPR because it's stricter than U.S. standards. If I'm servicing service members in Korea, we have to be aware of what their cyber rules are and what their financial rules are, because it does differ, and we will default to the strictest territory.
I apologize for throwing you a curveball on that. I know that you're with the USAA, and I asked you the global question. So I caught myself after I asked that, and I was like, okay, I shouldn't have probably let off with that. But
I think Jennifer's going to have a better answer to this one too.
Yeah, Jennifer, what are your thoughts on globalization? I mean, there's Walgreens and Boots all over the world, right?
Yeah, and my whole career has been for international organizations. So if I think back to the different areas of risk that we've talked about and the different dimensions, I would say that in general, the dimensions are typically, and the structure of it is the same. It's just like you mentioned, Michael, like how you might apply it. So, even with supplier diversity or diversity in general, there are, when we worked at Johnson Controls, there were groups in, China, for example, or in the UK that still, fell under this umbrella of, diversity and inclusion. And so we still had that same principle and those same goals, but it just looked slightly different in those regions. So that was something that was really interesting to learn about with our supplier diversity team and our that office that supported us. When you're thinking about financials, I would say financials are pretty standard. Obviously, the US with our GAAP accounting principles, it's going to be slightly different how you actually do your accounting. But accounting and finance is pretty standardized, globally. So I would say, from that perspective, that looks very similar, from one country to the next. So I think in general, the structure is going to be there. It's just going to be, as, we have all these different dimensions that have come up over the past 10 years. When I started it as well, it was only a few different dimensions of risk we looked at. As these things come up, we as a group and everybody who's managing risk, whether it's category managers or risk teams or anybody throughout our organizations, they're the ones that are helping us kind of identify how that's going to look in the areas that we're either serving our customers or our supply base.
Eric, I'll let you weigh in on this, and then I want to get into how teams are working together to manage risk. I've got a bunch of questions here. So give me your thoughts on globalization, and then we'll jump into how teams are working on this together.
Sure. Yeah. Real quick. I mean, from our perspective, I think Jennifer touched on it. Financials are pretty standard, but we have, from our perspective, it's about participation of that vendor or supplier, in the program. And so we're pretty successful to about 85 to 90% in getting the financials from private companies from over 150 plus countries. But it's really, really China has been our second highest country of coverage. And so we haven't had, there's pockets of different countries where, from our perspective, we may have to explain and get on the phone and use native language skills from our team to really walk them through why the program, it isn't punitive to them and they're not being singled out. But in terms of, so that's more of a participation globalization, based on country, but, pretty standard in terms of what we're looking at in terms of, income statement, balance sheet, cash flow.
Interesting. Really, really interesting. All right, I'm going to jump out. I'm going to share my screen again for a second. So I'm interested in, we're going to move a little bit towards how the teams are working together. And then I also want to talk about skill sets that make up good risk management professionals. I want to talk a little bit about what people should be thinking about for skills if they want to survive in this, right? I mean, the job of procurement and strategic sourcing is a constantly evolving job. And obviously there's skill sets. I know a lot of people are starting to get into data analytics for spend analytics and things like that, but I think there's other skills that are required in risk management as well. So let's talk, how do your teams work together to manage risk? This is a really interesting one. I had an original question of, hey, this isn't a single person operation anymore. This is much more holistic, and there's a lot more people inside of the organization that are contributing to minimize risk inside of the group. It's not just one person anymore. So I'll ask this question: do teams have zero connection, or are they all intertwined now? Third party, infosec, supply chain, procurement, credit in the actual risk department as well. I know at my last employer we had a risk department. So I'll start with you, Matt. Do you have any connection, or are you fully intertwined? Where are you at?
We're fully engaged across all the dimensions. So that's part of the journey that I was mentioning, where we moved 10 dimensions into one team, which is the group that, and I just got that about 2 months ago. So I'm still learning a lot of these
names,
groups, but
the names of the people in the groups.
Yeah, no, I got all the names. That wasn't too bad. There's only 16 of us, so I'm good with that. If I'd have pulled in a bigger team, I would be in trouble. But the dimensions that I don't manage directly, I'm connected with those folks every day, and in our procurement process, in our contracting process, we have to communicate constantly, because for whatever dimensions are triggered based on the inherent risk of a given supplier service, those dimensions have to all work together in order to get the contract to where it's able to be approved outside of the negotiations. But we have to complete all of our due diligence before we can sign a contract. So we're all talking all the time.
Yeah, Jennifer, how about yourself? Is it zero connection? Are you lone wolfing it, or are you intertwined, working holistically as a team now, or are you somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I would say Walgreens does a really good job of having, more support than I'm used to in the past, I would say. So there's a team that, helps us collect and monitor the data that we put into our risk assessment tool. So that is really great to have that support. We have an insurable risk that we work with to make sure that we're covered there. I'm trying to think of like financials, like I mentioned, we have procurement finance. So we definitely have a team. I would say we're still early on in our journey, but it's definitely one of the better programs that I've seen in my time in procurement. And I have a lot more support and a lot more team members that we're working together to monitor these. Like I mentioned, we have, pretty robust strategy process. And as we start to develop the strategies for some of the other dimensions of our category, I think that we'll get even better at working in, risk and, PESEL analysis and things like that will help us really identify and put together mitigation plans. So I think that part we're going to lead. But luckily we have a really good team together so far that's supporting it.
Eric, really interesting that both Matt and Jennifer say that they're almost fully integrated and they're working with multiple different facets of the company. Who is typically coming to you as a supplier and saying, "Hey, I need to start deploying products like RapidRatings"? Is it the procurement team? Is it a risk team? Is it somebody from IT? Like, who's coming?
Yeah, there's really 3 to 4, but the largest is supply chain, and we know that's been much broader. Obviously, firms went from being reactive state to now proactive, and companies are becoming more agile and nimble. And I think supply chain really took over the last year and a half because of everything with the pandemic and supply chain issues. So that's broader. And then third-party risk, vendor risk, again, for banks, insurance, I think that's falls into like Matt's role, OCC mandate, things like that. And procurement plays a role in there if it's procurement led or they're supporting it. I think credit finance teams tend to be a little bit more, they want to take it on, but yet they don't own all the relationships. So I think that's where it gets a little pigeonholed sometimes. And so you would think we sell to those the most, but it's really supply chain, third-party risk, and then smaller groups of credit and finance, which it's great. They can leverage us so they can free up and do other things. But I think because they don't own the relationships, they have to rely on folks probably like Jennifer to, own the relationship. Sometimes it can just be contained in there, but I think it's getting better, obviously, due to everything, the state of the world. And then having the technology, right? If you can bake it in across the organization in an enterprise or a solution, GRC or procurement, then more
Eric, I'm
groups are going to
curious.
leverage it.
Oh, sorry. I was curious if you hear from a lot of transformation teams, because I know ours is
Yeah,
really fantastic, and
Yeah,
they
exactly.
really got this charge. And
yeah, getting
they're
the digital house in order, so to speak.
yeah,
So
yeah, we have a great roadmap, and I'm really excited
yeah,
to see that. So I'm glad to hear that you hear from them too.
yep, it's all about platform to platform APIs, and so that's leads us to more, proactive and predictive, and then leveraging AI, and so really good stuff there. Yeah, thanks, Jennifer.
So that leads to my next question, which is around complexity. This thing is getting more and more complex on a daily basis. It's not getting easier, right, Matt? By any stretch of the imagination, this isn't getting easier. There's just more and more dimensions that ultimately will be added, in your opinion, Matt? Oh, is Matt there?
No, it is complex, and can you hear me?
Yep, I got you, buddy.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely getting more complex, and I think that the biggest key for my team right now is communication and education. What we run into a lot is relationship owners within our company, out in the business units, coming to us and saying, "Well, why didn't you look at this company for reputation, and why didn't you look at this company for InfoSec?" And we say, "Well, we have this inherent risk measurement that looks at every one of our dimensions, and if it triggers, then we do the assessment, and if it doesn't trigger, we don't."
Right, because we don't have a staff of 500. That's why.
Exactly, and that's the issue. It's can't how do we capture, measure, and report the risks without I'm not sure how to say this right, and maybe damaging someone's ego because they think their supplier is the most important supplier in the world, and therefore should be measured on all risk dimensions at all time. It's a delicate communication and education task that falls on top of all the execution work that we have to do. Luckily, we have our greater third-party risk management group handles that education. My team is all about the execution, but answering that, why didn't you look at this company for this, when it's coming from a senior executive, it's not always the funnest conversation in the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I mean, it's interesting to think that, okay, we now work in a team, right? In a fabric, if you will, of people attempting to all work together to come up with a risk number or a risk evaluation across a particular vendor, and potentially their tier 2 vendors and their tier 3 vendors. But at the same time, how do you manage the expectations of what I'll call the stakeholders, right? The people that we're buying things for, who might not be in the risk team, right? And why does somebody say, "I can't believe you didn't look at this telephone expense management company? They're the most important part of my life this year." And you're like, "Yeah, but they're $1 million worth of spend," versus, like, we have to prioritize things, right? That's what you're trying to do. You're going to manage expectations of your stakeholders, just like any other project that comes through. It's okay. Yeah, there's more contracts than opportunities here, more contracts than people in procurement, right? At all times. So you have to figure out, okay, I'm not going to spend 15 hours on $1,000 contract, but you also have to now set expectations against risk with those stakeholders as well. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are, like you mentioned, everyone does feel that their space is quite important, and it really is. But I think the education, like you mentioned, is a really important piece. We have to understand as well that, as category managers, we have so many different priorities and so many things that are important. So, from my perspective, we try to take the approach of really working on building that relationship and trying to have that really good working relationship together, so that we kind of set those expectations ahead of time and talk through, like, what are the most important things in this category or for this supplier or this purchase, and these are the things that we're going to tackle and work on this year or this fiscal year. We're pretty open with our stakeholders, whether it can be some difficult conversations or obviously some of the easier ones where you don't see, the same outcome that we'd like to see. But I think that's really where that relationship building is really critical and important, which, at Walgreens, we really stress as something that's important with our team. And, I think as we refine our skill set, like you mentioned, it's changed over the years. And that's something that has really been increasingly more important as a procurement individual versus before when it was just, financial analysis and project management. So
Right.
something that's really helped us be able to be successful there.
Communication. Yep.
Communication. Yep.
So like anything else, this has to be flexible, right? We talked about this in the walkthrough, which I thought was really smart, which was, hey, your risk management program needs to be a flexible business model, because you do occasionally get ad hoc requests that need to be reprioritized in. I'm assuming, Matt, right? Like anything else, all of a sudden the CEO's got a bug because he wants to do something and he wants it done in 6.5 hours, and it's like, well, it's going to take us 6.5 hours just to open up a folder on this, right? So how important is the ability to be able to be flexible, because you're getting all sorts of new things in on the regular, right? Then you've got an existing pool that you have to continuously monitor, right? I mean, this isn't something that you do when you first meet your vendors and then you put it in a folder somewhere and you put it away, right? Risk management now is a continuously ongoing process, because I don't think anybody could have potentially figured out that my toilet paper manufacturer would have gone on the fritz when the global pandemic hit. But somewhere in the continuing monitoring of that comes out due to the supply chain, right? So Matt, talk to me a little bit about how you manage ad hoc versus continuous and how that all works for you.
You look at the title of the person sending the request.
Do you have the VIP section? We used to have the VIP section. It was like, if this guy drops his phone in a toilet, he gets a new phone in less than an hour.
Right. No, it really, we have to build in buffer time because we know we're going to get those. And they can be coming from the business, they can be coming from the negotiator, or they can be coming from a regulator. So, a regulator request goes to the top of the stack.
Yeah.
Because most of those are 24-hour turnaround, and we got to get it out, and it's got to be accurate and understandable. Beyond things like that, we build in enough flexibility into our workload models to say, yes, we can take the expected amount of injects on a regular basis. And we just, if somebody comes to us and says, I need a full financial and compliance workup of this company by the end of the day, we can say we can deliver that, but it's not going to be very good. If you give us the appropriate amount of time, which is for us, a week or two, depending on what type of analysis we're doing. Yeah, we're going to get you our best work. If you need something right away because you just have to have it, then we're going to be best efforts. That's really all you can do. And putting an extra zero on my budget and hire another 20 or 30 people.
Let me go to
what we can do, and setting the expectations in advance, I think, really helps.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me go to Eric. Eric, I want to come back because Matt said something really interesting, which is, hey, listen, I can only get so much done in so much time, right? And collecting data is one thing, but converting data into and I'm going to bring the screen back up. Converting data into actionable information is a big step in the process, right? I mean, being able to collect the data is one thing. Being able to interpret that and determine, almost make an analysis of where the risk is so that you can get that information out to that stakeholder is a completely different item. Talk a little bit about the differences between data and actionable information for you as a provider and how you try and educate people on that level.
Sure. Yeah. Really, really good point. So, good news is, once we have the financial data, it's all about automation. And so almost like we're robo analysts where we're providing those insights and deeper dive. So the commentary, kind of the deeper dive like an analyst would do and write up something is all automated. So it's at the fingertips. I think what's nice is the fact that we're giving someone the real questions to ask, to dive deeper. So leaning into the supplier, like Jennifer had said, about communication. Mm-hmm. So using tools that are leveraging AI, right, to pull out those contextual insights based on that company's particular issues. And so that's why it's really important from our perspective. We have different models for different industries, and that really hones in on the issues for that particular company or vendor supplier, in that industry. And so the issues that kind of bubble up are very pertinent to the financials for that company. So then a category manager like Jennifer can ask the right questions. If they're not equipped from the financial perspective, then they have the cliff notes and everything there. So I think that perspective is really helpful because it's at their fingertips.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ed Murphy from LinkedIn asked a question, and I think it's to Matthew. How much buffer time do you build in? And I don't know if it's buffer time, but how much time do you allocate out for ad hoc stuff in your 40-hour work week of your team? Is it 10% of your time is set aside for ad hoc stuff, 15, 25%? Like how much of it is, hey, we don't know what we don't know right now, and because of that, we've got to allocate 20% of our time to the unknowns?
It's because the team is still pretty new in bringing it together. We're erring on the side of caution and saying 20 to 25% of our time will be available for ad hoc. My team would love you if you could find them a 40-hour work week. That would be great.
Yeah, sorry.
But that is the schedule. So no, 20 to 25% right now. We'll get some better measurement of it over the course of 5 or 6 months. I'll get enough data to say this is what we're really getting. But we've seen exponential increase in the number of assessments we're doing over the last couple of months as we've combined the teams, and we're just going to have to see where it settles out.
Yep. All right, I'm going to jump because we've only got about 10 minutes left. If you have questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A. But
hey, Mike,
yes, go ahead.
One thing to add to that is business is picking up now and the economy is bouncing back. It doesn't have to be about who's trending down, but can those businesses keep up with you if your business is growing? So That's another twist on, hey, now that things are bouncing back and there's demand. I mean, I'm sure, we just remodeled our kitchen and how long cabinets took. So, things along those lines from supply chain, but also in your business, you can look at those companies that are really winding up again too.
Yeah, that's a great example, which is, okay, now all of a sudden I'm at 130% of where 150% of where I was last year. I'm not the only client that's at 150%. Are you going to be able to handle the stress of the snapback post-pandemic of where we're going to? In a lot of cases, it's even more than it was pre-pandemic, right? Let's talk with the time we have left. I just want to talk about where we're heading. So risk management means short and long-term decision making. I'm really interested in the death of the reactive state, being stronger, better together as a team. Let's talk about that a little bit. The reactive state versus the proactive state. This is the utopian vision of risk management, right? Which is, and I don't know that we can always get there, but we can try really hard. I mean, reactive is not where you want to be in the risk management space, AKA the press release saying we didn't know that they had children putting microchips in our phones, right? That type of situation. So let's talk a little bit about short-term versus long-term decision-making. Jennifer, how do you see, and what are your thoughts on the reactive state, which was kind of the history of risk management versus, and it was, hey, ask the one question, put it in a folder, and then hope and pray that nothing goes wrong, to the reactive, proactive management, ongoing management side?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have seen a lot of that reactivity, like you mentioned. And I think, as I look forward and as I see the things that the transformation team at Walgreens is working on, it really does give me a lot of confidence that there are certain critical dimensions that we're looking at and that they're monitoring and supporting us in that way. And I think the next step for me is, in our group actually, is just to make sure that when we're building those strategies, that if there aren't dimensions that we're looking at with that team, that we either advocate to have them added or advocate to monitor for now by ourselves. I think that unfortunately it's going to continue to evolve, and eventually we'll get there to that utopian view of it. But unfortunately, there's going to continue to be some monitoring and manual work that's part of being a category manager. We've had to evolve our skill sets over the years, starting with, back when I was looking at financials, and luckily I have a finance background and was able to kind of look at some of these things myself. But now it's going to be a lot more challenging for me and my team members to keep looking at, what's on the horizon and keep our eyes out. So unfortunately, it's not really an easy answer. And, I really hope that as our transformation team continues to grow and continues to improve, that we get to those all the dimensions that are most critical. But unfortunately, it's going to be a slow process, and it's going to be, a journey that we're on.
I think that's really interesting that category managers aren't just subject matter experts in what they're buying anymore, but they have to start to bring in data analytics. They have to start to bring in risk analysis. They have to bring in all these new skill sets that they haven't necessarily had before to evolve. And we talk a lot about people being, ruled out by technology as they come in the next 5 to 10 years. And I just see the job changing so much and going from tactical to strategic in so many ways. I think it's really interesting. Eric, tell me a little bit about short-term versus long-term decision-making and how products like yours actually help people to go from, okay, yeah, I got to make a short-term decision, but then there's a long-term decision that I need to, or a long-term monitoring that I need to take.
Sure. So it really is around automation, of course, leveraging AI and automation. And then for us, it's that short-term risk score, the FHR, intersecting with core health and the quadrant analysis. But I think also, of course, I mentioned platform to platform, and I think it's operationalizing, from our perspective, financial health throughout the workflows and processes. So just talking to a client this morning, they're building out more workflow and process in their vendor risk module, to alert them, obviously, if a company falls below a certain threshold, who does it get kicked off to? What report do they run? What other questions do they ask, and then so forth. So I think that whole chain of events in automating that. And then the other thing in terms of, short-term to long-term is that, data hygiene comes into the mix. And with new networks in place, like, Trust Your Supplier and others, we're seeing more interest in suppliers, from suppliers wanting to do it once and share it across many, so they don't have to keep doing this over and over again.
Wow, I'm gonna go back. There are about
there's a lot there.
There's about 100 nuggets you've all dropped that I want to get into, like sound bits. Matt, just quickly from you. Obviously, you said already you're being taxed with the organization that you have. Obviously, the automation and thankfully some tools are coming to market to help that could probably lessen some of this burden and help get more stuff through the pipeline as you go and more active monitoring, right? How important is the innovation of technology to you in order to succeed in the future?
Oh, it's a huge part of the business. What we're seeing I worked in the financial viability and reputation space for 6 years before I came into this combined team, and what we were able to do in those two, in the streamlining of the process and in the automation and a little bit of outsourcing using third-party providers for some of that information. We're not doing any of that in the other 8 dimensions that I now have, and we're doing very little of it in the ones that I don't own. So there is a huge opportunity we're doing a process improvement work right now because that doesn't cost us anything. We're starting to explore AI and third-party vendors for several of these other functions. But once you do that, you got to find budget for it, and risk got really expensive over the last couple of years. So finding excess budget is a fun exercise.
I used to be in business continuity, and somebody said, I don't understand why we need a business continuity program. And I said, well, you won't until you actually need one. It's one of those things that you should pray you never need, right? And it only justifies itself once when, everybody needs to go to the bunker. So anyway, listen, I want to first off, I want to thank you all for your time today. We've got about 3 minutes left. Give you a couple of seconds to think about this. What is the one critical takeaway nugget that you can give our members that are watching and people who are going to watch this over the next few weeks? What's the one thing you can tell them that is a takeaway for them? I've got a couple, which is build time into your schedule. Make sure you've got proper data hygiene, which I think is fantastic. And also be prepared for multiple dimensions. If you're only looking at one dimension, you're probably not there yet. By the way, the answer to our question was an average of about 3. When I went and looked at all the answers, everybody said they were about a 3. I think some folks are probably giving them a little bit more credit, but God bless you. If that's what your number really is, then that's fantastic. A couple of 4.5s in there. I don't know if they're at 4.5s or not. Some people are turning water into wine in their risk management departments, apparently. So let's start with Jennifer again, ladies first. Jennifer, what's one golden nugget that you can leave the audience with around their risk management program for the future?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to build it off of a little bit when you said, make sure that you allocate time to risk. I think for me, there's a lot of prioritization that has to happen. And I would say communicate that out to whether it's your leadership, your stakeholders, to make sure that everyone's aligned with the areas of risk that you are looking at in those dimensions and how you're approaching it. And if you do create a mitigation plan, please, please, please follow through with it, because that's something that is going to be so critical to make sure that, we're ready and set up and that we have a robust risk mitigation plan.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. Matt, what's the one thing you can leave people with today?
Communicate and educate. That's really the key, like part of what Jennifer said. You have to become a risk management evangelist within your company. You have to go out and tell everybody what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it's important, how it impacts them, and also why you're not going to do certain things. And just communicate.
Wow, great stuff. All right, Evan, one last nugget that you could drop on the audience.
Absolutely.
Today.
I think it's share information, share it frequently. Don't just put it down, like you said, in a file. I think it's really staying on top of it. And while financials you think aren't changing, the companies are changing all the time. So you've really got to look at it more frequently, depending on the criticality. And don't ignore those private companies either, just because you can't get data on them.
Yeah. So I'll end it with this. I think what Matt said was fantastic. I think being an evangelist for your service is essential. If you don't take a zealous approach to telling people about what you do and the value proposition that you bring, you probably need to dial it up a little bit, because people get excited about and help you with it. Risk is not the most exciting topic on everybody's plate. Most people tend to walk away with it. The second most important word after audit, right? So but you have to figure out a way to make risk interesting and exciting for your stakeholders and for your peer organizations that are going to help you with your evaluation and your ongoing support and management of your risk program as it grows. All right. Thank you so much to the panel. It was amazing. I always learn more on these things. And again, we did another hour again, which I know is great. Matt, thank you. I know you've got a hard stop. Jennifer, thank you so much for jumping in here. And Eric, thanks to RapidRatings for supporting us. I really appreciate it. And we will be in touch. RapidRatings, by the way, is a sponsor of Procurement Foundry. You all should know that. We've got a number of different ways to get in touch with RapidRatings through either the community or through our website. So thank you for all of that. And thank you to Eric again for today's webinar. All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Talk to you
Take
soon.
care.
Bye-bye.